The sky was dark with the looming shadows of alien ships as they descended into Earth's atmosphere. People all over the world watched in disbelief as the fleet of massive, intimidating vessels filled the sky. The alien princess, leader of the invasion force, stood at the helm of her flagship, her eyes cold and resolute. She had come to Earth to conquer it, to claim it as the next addition to her empire. Her people had conquered countless worlds, and now, Earth would be no different. On the ground, chaos spread. Military forces scrambled to defend their cities, but the alien technology was far superior. Their weapons could blast entire cities to rubble with a single shot. The princess's fleet hovered above major cities, ready to strike. The air was thick with tension as the world's leaders tried to figure out how to respond. But there was one thing the princess hadn't counted on: humanity's resolve. Despite the overwhelming odds, humans were determined to fight for their home. They weren't ready to give up without a battle. Armed forces began preparing for war, ready to take on the alien invaders, though they knew it might be a losing battle. The princess didn't care. She believed in the strength of her people, their advanced technology, and their right to claim the Earth. She looked down at the planet, the blue and green of the oceans and continents flashing through the windows of her ship. Her eyes narrowed as she thought of the destruction that would come. "This world will kneel before us," she whispered to herself. As her fleet descended into Earth's atmosphere, the princess could feel the power of her ships shaking the ground beneath her feet. The soldiers on board prepared for the invasion, loading weapons and readying their battle suits. The princess's heart raced with excitement, ready to lead her army into victory. She had conquered so many worlds before. Earth would be no different. But even as she steeled herself for battle, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something about Earth was different. She had studied countless planets before, but there was something about the human spirit, something she hadn't anticipated. It was more than their stubbornness. There was a fire in them, a desire to survive, to protect their world. She had never encountered a species quite like this. The first wave of alien ships descended upon a major city, unleashing their devastating weapons. Explosions erupted in every direction, and the air was filled with the sound of sirens and cries of panic. The humans fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Buildings crumbled, and the streets were filled with chaos as the princess's forces pressed forward. In the midst of the destruction, a lone human soldier stood his ground, firing his weapon at the advancing aliens. He had no idea that this battle would be the turning point in his life, nor could he have imagined that he would soon play a role in the princess's fate. For now, he simply fought for survival, his thoughts focused on the immediate threat in front of him. The princess watched from above, her heart hardened as she observed the human soldiers fighting to the bitter end. She had come to destroy them. But what she didn't realize was that she was about to face something she had never expected: an enemy who wouldn't simply bow to her will. The battle had only just begun. The battle raged on as explosions echoed through the city. The alien forces pressed forward, their weapons tearing through buildings and streets. Humanity's defenses, though brave, were no match for the overwhelming power of the invaders. The princess's fleet hovered above, a dark shadow casting over the ruins of what was once a thriving metropolis. On the ground, the human soldier, Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, fought with everything he had. His hand shook as he reloaded his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen his comrades fall, their bodies littering the ground around him. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything he cared about was at risk. Daniel had been trained for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of the alien princess. He saw her for the first time as she stood on a nearby building, surveying the destruction below. Her figure was tall and commanding, the metallic armor she wore glinting in the dim light of the city. She looked down on the battlefield with cold, calculating eyes, the weight of leadership heavy on her shoulders. Suddenly, a blast from one of her ships shook the ground beneath Daniel's feet. He stumbled, losing his footing as debris rained down around him. He heard a faint cry from a nearby soldier, but there was no time to help. He had to keep moving. But as Daniel ran for cover, he saw her. The princess was standing alone now, separated from her unit. Her soldiers were busy elsewhere, engaged in the chaos of the battle. She was vulnerable. A strange feeling washed over Daniel. His first instinct was to fire, to take down the leader of the invaders. But as he looked at her, something stopped him. There was a flicker of hesitation in his mind, something that told him not to act. Before he could make a decision, a small group of alien soldiers appeared, weapons raised, intent on taking the princess. Without thinking, Daniel acted. He ran toward her, his mind focused on one goal, saving her life. He dove into the fray, gunfire blazing around him as he took down the soldiers one by one. His heart raced, not out of fear, but out of necessity. He had to protect her. The princess watched in disbelief as the human soldier effortlessly took down her guards. His movements were swift, precise, and calculated, skills that no ordinary human should have. Her mind raced. Why was he helping her? He should be trying to kill her, just like everyone else. Yet here he was, risking his life to protect hers. As the last of her attackers fell, Daniel turned to face her. The princess, still stunned, slowly lowered her weapon. She was defenseless now, but instead of taking advantage of the moment, the soldier didn't move to strike. For a long moment, they stood facing each other in the middle of the devastation. The soldier was breathing heavily, sweat and dirt staining his uniform. The princess was still, her eyes searching his face for some hint of why he had done this. "Why?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with confusion. "Why did you save me?" Daniel didn't have an answer. He just stared at her, unsure of what to say. He was a soldier, trained to fight for Earth, to protect humanity. But this was different. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that in this moment, things had changed. He could have killed her. He had the chance, but instead, he had saved her life. And that decision would set the course for everything that would follow. The princess, still in shock, watched the human soldier as he holstered his weapon and approached her slowly. Her mind was racing. She had been taught that humans were a weak species, driven by fear and chaos. Yet here was this soldier, showing more courage and honor than she had ever expected. He had saved her, not because he had to, but because he chose to. The alien princess, known for her fierceness in battle, was at a loss for words. Daniel, breathing heavily from the battle, was also unsure of what to do next. He had saved her, yes, but why? In the heat of the moment, it felt like the right thing to do. Now, faced with the reality of what he had just done, he wondered if he had made the right choice. He knew she was dangerous, a warrior who could destroy entire cities with a mere command. Yet he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Something inside him told him that there was more to this princess than what met the eye. The princess, still standing tall despite her injuries, eyed him carefully. She had been taught to look down upon humanity, to see them as nothing more than another conquest. But now, she was beginning to doubt everything she had ever known. How could a human risk so much for her? Was it because he was afraid? Or was there something deeper at play here? "You could have killed me," she said, her voice cold yet curious. "Why didn't you?" Daniel hesitated, not knowing how to respond. He had been trained to fight, to kill, to protect his people. But this was different. There was something about her, about the way she carried herself, that made him pause. It wasn't fear that he felt. It was something else, something that made him question the simple black and white lines of war. "I don't know," Daniel said quietly. You're not what I expected." The princess narrowed her eyes, still trying to understand his words. She had always seen humans as enemies, but now, in this moment of confusion, she felt something she had never felt before, a spark of curiosity. "You're not afraid of me?" she asked, her voice softening slightly. Daniel shook his head. "I should be, shouldn't I? But right now, I don't think fear is the right response. I think we're all just trying to survive." The princess was silent, absorbing his words. She had expected humans to tremble at her presence, to beg for mercy. But this man, this soldier, stood before her with no fear, no hatred. It was as if the entire reason she had come to Earth was crumbling right before her eyes. "You risked your life for someone like me," the princess said, the edge in her voice now replaced with an uncertain softness. "Why?" Daniel took a deep breath. Maybe there's more to this than just fighting. I think we both deserve a chance to understand each other before it's too late." His words were simple, but they carried weight. In that moment, something shifted between them. The princess, once determined to destroy humanity, now found herself questioning everything. She had expected to see weakness in humans, but instead, she was witnessing something far more powerful: compassion. The silence between them lingered for a few moments before the princess took a step back. She had been taught to destroy, to conquer, and yet this human soldier was forcing her to rethink everything she had been raised to believe. As the sounds of distant explosions echoed in the background, both of them knew that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, they both felt as though something had changed, and neither of them knew where this unexpected encounter would lead. The princess sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the soldier before her. They were hidden in a small, abandoned building, away from the chaos of the battlefield. The air inside was thick with dust, but the quiet offered a rare moment of peace. For the first time since her arrival, the princess felt something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, but something more complex, something that made her uneasy. She had always been the conqueror, the one in control. Now, for the first time, she was unsure. The soldier, Daniel, had removed his helmet, revealing his tired eyes and the bruises on his face from the battle. His clothes were torn, and his body was covered in dirt and sweat. Yet, despite all of it, there was a calmness about him. He had risked his life to save hers. The princess still couldn't understand why. "Tell me," the princess began, her voice softer than it had been before. "Why did you do it? Why save me? I am the one who came to destroy your world." Daniel looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fear, no hatred in his gaze, only curiosity. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I saw someone in trouble, and I did what I thought was right. I'm not a hero. I'm just a soldier, doing what I'm told. But in that moment, I didn't want to just follow orders. I wanted to make a choice, for once. And that choice was to help you." The princess looked at him, her mind spinning. The idea of someone helping her, not out of fear or a desire to win, but simply because it was the right thing to do, was foreign to her. In her world, everything was about power, about showing strength. Help was given only to those who deserved it. And she was not accustomed to receiving help, especially from someone who was supposed to be her enemy. "Why do you fight?" she asked, her tone now filled with genuine curiosity. "Why do humans fight so hard, even when it seems like there's no chance of winning?" Daniel leaned back against the wall, taking a deep breath. His gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of his words hung in the air. "We fight because we have to," he said, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "We fight because we believe in something. Not just survival, but something deeper, hope. Even when everything feels impossible, we keep fighting because we believe that maybe, just maybe, we can make a difference. That's what keeps us going, even when we don't have the strength to stand." The princess was quiet, her mind racing. She had heard of human resilience, but hearing it from the soldier himself made it feel real raw. Her people had never experienced this kind of resolve. They had never fought for hope. They fought for conquest, for power, for control. To them, humans were weak, survival-driven, and easily crushed. But now, standing before her, was proof that humans were something far greater than what she had been taught. "How can you still have hope?" the princess asked, almost whispering. "After everything that's happened." Daniel paused, the weight of the question settling in. "Because hope is all we have," he said simply. Without it, what are we fighting for? His words struck the princess deeply. She had come to Earth expecting to crush its people, to claim it for her own. But now, standing in the quiet of this ruined building, she felt something stir inside her. Was there something worth saving here? Was there a chance for peace between their worlds? She wasn't sure yet, but for the first time, she found herself wanting to find out. The soldier's story had sparked something inside her, a feeling she had long buried beneath her duty to conquer. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an invader. She felt uncertain, yet strangely hopeful. As the sounds of battle continued in the distance, the princess realized that the fight ahead would not be just against the humans. It would be against everything she had ever known. Days passed in the quiet aftermath of the battle. The princess and Daniel had managed to stay hidden, far from the main conflict. The human soldier had taken her to a safe house, a small cabin in the woods, far away from the destruction that had once surrounded them. The princess had been wounded, but the soldier tended to her injuries with surprising care. She had never known humans could be so gentle, especially towards someone like her. He was not only protecting her body, but his actions seemed to show a deep respect for her as well, even though she was his enemy. Each day, they spoke more. At first, it had been small talk, with Daniel asking about her species and the princess sharing bits of her world's history. But soon, the conversations grew deeper. They began to share their fears, their dreams, and for the first time in a long while, they began to see each other as more than just an enemy and a conqueror. The princess, whose people had always taught her to view humans with disdain, found herself curious about their way of life. Daniel, in turn, was learning more about the alien culture, and the stories she told him fascinated him. Despite their differences, there was an undeniable connection beginning to form between them. The soldier was no longer just a human to her. He was someone she could talk to, someone who listened. One evening, as they sat by a small fire outside the cabin, Daniel turned to her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "What made you come to Earth?" he asked quietly. "What is it that you were hoping to find here?" The princess looked up at the sky, the stars shining brightly above. For a moment, she didn't answer. She had always known her purpose: to conquer, to expand the empire, to bring new worlds under her people's rule. But now, with Daniel sitting beside her, she wasn't so sure anymore. "I was taught that Earth was weak," she said, her voice soft but steady. "That it was just another planet for us to take. My people saw it as a conquest, another step in our rise to power. But now, I see things differently." Daniel didn't say anything. He just listened, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke. "I don't know what I was expecting," she continued. "I thought I would come, defeat you all, and return to my people with victory. But I've learned that humans are not as weak as we thought. You don't give up. Even when faced with impossible odds, you fight for something, for each other, for your world." Daniel nodded slowly. He could see the conflict in her eyes. It was clear now that she was no longer just a conqueror. She was someone struggling with her own beliefs, her duty to her people, and her growing doubts. "Maybe you're starting to understand," he said. "It's not about winning or losing. It's about what you stand for, what you're willing to protect. We fight for each other, not because we have to, but because we choose to." The princess looked down, deep in thought. She had always been taught that power was the only thing worth fighting for, that strength and control were what made a ruler great. But Daniel's words had given her something to think about, something beyond war and conquest. She had seen firsthand the strength of the human spirit, and now she was beginning to wonder if maybe she, too, could change. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the princess wasn't sure what the future held. Her mission had always been clear: conquer Earth and return to her people victorious. But now, sitting by the fire with a human soldier, she realized that there was so much more to discover, so much more to learn. As the fire crackled between them, the princess and Daniel shared a quiet understanding. Their worlds had collided, But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected had begun to grow, a bond that neither of them had anticipated, and neither of them knew just how much it would change the course of their lives. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The princess had never felt so torn in her life. She was a warrior, trained to conquer, to lead her people to victory. Yet everything she had been taught was now in question. Daniel, the human soldier, had shown her something she never expected: compassion. She had come to Earth with the intent to destroy, to crush humanity beneath her feet. But now, after spending so much time with him, she wasn't so sure. The cabin, once a place of refuge, had become a place of confusion. The princess spent hours pacing, deep in thought. She had to make a choice, one that would affect not just her life, but the fate of both Earth and her people. Should she return to her fleet, complete her mission, and destroy the humans who had shown her kindness? Or should she risk everything and defy her people, standing with Daniel and the humans she had once seen as nothing more than pests? The princess sat on the edge of the bed, staring out of the small window. The distant sounds of war echoed through the night, reminding her of the world she had left behind. Her mind kept circling back to the one thing that stood out above all: hope. Daniel had spoken about hope, about fighting for something greater than survival. The humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to protect what mattered. That was something her people had never understood. For them, war was about power, about conquest, about showing dominance. But now, in the quiet of the cabin, she was beginning to wonder if there was more to life than that. "You're thinking too much." Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. He had entered the room quietly, as he always did. His face was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes that caught her off guard. "It's hard, isn't it? Knowing what's right and what's expected of you." The princess looked at him, the weight of his words settling deep within her. "I never thought I'd be in this position. I never thought I'd have to choose between my duty and what feels right." Daniel stepped closer, his expression sympathetic. "I can't tell you what to do. But I know one thing: no matter what you choose, you don't have to do it alone." She felt a knot tighten in her chest. The soldier's words were simple, yet they meant more than anything she had ever heard. She had always been alone in her decisions, raised to believe that she alone was responsible for the fate of her people. Now this human, this soldier, was offering her something she had never considered: partnership. He wasn't asking her to abandon her mission or her people. He was simply offering her the chance to make her own choice. "I've never had someone like you," she said softly. "Someone who would help me, even when it's not in their best interest. You risked everything to save me. Why?" Daniel paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything. It's not about what's easy. It's about what's worth fighting for." The princess turned away, feeling the weight of his words like a heavy burden pressing against her chest. Could she really go back to her people after everything she had learned? Could she lead her fleet to destroy a species that had shown her so much kindness? And yet, if she defied her orders, if she betrayed her people, what would happen to her? To Daniel? To Earth? The uncertainty was unbearable. She felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no way to know which path would lead to salvation. As the night deepened, the princess realized that there was no simple answer. But one thing was clear: she could no longer fight for just power. She had to fight for something greater, for the possibility of a future where peace was possible, even between their two worlds. The princess had made her decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't certain. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't do it alone. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to ask for help. The days following the princess's decision were filled with tension. She had chosen to stand with Daniel, the human soldier, and together they would try to find a way to bring peace. But not everyone agreed with her choice. On both sides, there were factions that refused to accept peace. They saw it as weakness, as betrayal. The princess's people, her own soldiers, were growing impatient. Her decision to spare humans, to protect them, had already begun to stir anger in her ranks. They believed her leadership was faltering. On Earth, many human leaders, too, saw her as a threat, unsure of her intentions. In the quiet cabin, the princess sat beside Daniel, her thoughts troubled. She had come to Earth to destroy it, and yet now she found herself trying to protect it. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like an unbearable force. If she was going to change the course of this war, she needed support. She needed more than just Daniel. She needed allies. But as she and Daniel had discussed their plan for peace, they didn't realize that not everyone would be willing to listen. On the alien side, a powerful general named Zorak was growing restless. Zorak was known for his ruthless campaigns, always leading his soldiers to victory through sheer strength and intimidation. He believed that the princess's compassion was a weakness, and he could not stand by and watch her betray their mission. In his eyes, humans were nothing more than obstacles to their rightful dominance. Zorak began to gather his own followers, plotting in the shadows. His army was ready to make its move, and he would stop at nothing to destroy anyone who stood in his way, including the princess. He had heard rumors of her intentions to spare Earth, and he knew that if the princess was allowed to continue her plans, their empire would be weakened. Meanwhile, on Earth, a group of human military leaders, suspicious of the princess's motives, were also preparing to act. They believed her to be a threat, and they couldn't afford to let her live, no matter how much the soldier, Daniel, spoke of peace. Their fear had clouded their judgment. They didn't see the princess as a person. They saw her as an enemy. The war was too far gone for them to trust her. The two forces, Zorak's alien faction and the human military leaders, were about to collide, and neither the princess nor Daniel could see it coming. One night, as the princess and Daniel discussed their next steps, they heard the distant sounds of approaching ships. The ground shook as a fleet of alien ships appeared on the horizon, far too close for comfort. Zorak had made his move, and now, it seemed, everything was about to fall apart. "What's happening?" the princess asked, her voice tight with fear and confusion. She had thought she had more time to prepare, to reach out to those who might stand with her. But Zorak had acted quickly, and now it seemed that the war she had hoped to avoid was inevitable. Daniel stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "It's Zorak," he said grimly. "He's come to finish what he started, and I don't think he'll stop until you're dead." The princess's heart raced as the reality of the situation sank in. Her own people, the ones she had once trusted, were now the ones who sought her downfall. And on Earth, the very people she was trying to protect might soon see her as an enemy. With the threat closing in on them, the princess and Daniel knew they had no choice but to act. Their only hope now was to find a way to unite both sides before it was too late, before the war consumed everything. As the first blasts of enemy fire lit up the sky, the princess and Daniel prepared for the fight of their lives. They would face enemies from both their worlds, but this time they would fight together. The path to peace was not clear, but it was the only choice left, and it was a choice that would define the fate of both Earth and the alien empire. The battle had arrived faster than the princess and Daniel had anticipated. Zorak's forces descended upon their position with overwhelming speed, and the human military, missiled by fear and distrust, moved in to engage as well. The princess had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but now, faced with enemies from both sides, she realized the fight for her survival, and for the survival of Earth, had become inevitable. The ground shook as explosions rang out in the distance. The sky was darkened by the shadows of alien ships, and the air was filled with the roar of weapons firing. The princess and Daniel had retreated to a makeshift defense position, hidden among the trees and debris, but they knew it wouldn't be long before their enemies found them. "Zorak won't stop until you're dead," Daniel said, his voice tense as he checked his weapon. "And the human military isn't far behind." The princess nodded, her face pale with the weight of the situation. She had never thought she would be here, fighting not only for her life, but for a chance at peace. She had chosen to protect humanity, and now she was paying the price. Zorak, with his thirst for power, wouldn't let her live. And the humans, driven by their own fears and doubts, were no better. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Daniel's eyes widened. "They're here," he muttered. The princess turned to him. "We can't fight both sides. We need to get out of here. Now." But it was too late. Zorak's soldiers had found them, surrounding their position. The princess knew they had no way of escaping without a fight. Her hand instinctively went to the weapon at her side, but Daniel stopped her. "Let me handle this," he said, his voice steady. "I'll draw their fire. You need to get to the escape route." Before she could protest, Daniel stepped forward, pulling his weapon into position. He looked back at the princess, his expression filled with determination. "You're the future of peace, not me. I'm just a soldier." The princess felt her heart tighten at his words. She had grown to trust him, more than anyone she had ever known. And now, he was willing to sacrifice himself to give her a chance to escape. It was a choice she couldn't bear to accept. "No," she said, stepping in front of him. "I can't let you do this." But Daniel was already moving, his actions swift and calculated. He fired several shots, taking down the first wave of enemies. The sound of gunfire echoed through the woods as the battle raged around them. The princess tried to fight alongside him, but she was quickly overwhelmed. She had never fought in a battle like this before. Her strength, her resolve, everything she had known as a princess, was being tested in ways she couldn't have prepared for. As Daniel held off their attackers, the princess realized the truth. There was no escaping this war, no running away from the choices they had made. If she was to have any hope of seeing her dream of peace come true, she had to act now. The princess pushed forward, taking down the remaining soldiers in a quick and efficient strike. She fought not just for herself, but for Daniel, for the humans, and for the future she hoped to build. But as the final enemy fell, she turned to find Daniel collapsed on the ground, blood staining his uniform. His sacrifice had allowed her to survive, allowed her to stand a chance at what lay ahead. Tears filled her eyes as she knelt beside him, her heart breaking at the cost of his life. "No," she whispered, but there was nothing she could do. He was gone. The princess looked up at the sky, the weight of the loss sinking in, but there was no time for grief. The battle was far from over, and her mission, her true mission, had only just begun. Daniel had given his life so that she could keep fighting. She would honor his sacrifice by finishing what they had started, the fight for peace, for humanity, and for a future where neither side would have to suffer again. With one final glance at Daniel's body, the princess stood tall. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was clear. There was no turning back now. The sounds of distant explosions echoed through the forest as the princess stood, her hand trembling but steady on her weapon. Daniel's sacrifice weighed heavily on her heart, but there was no time for mourning. She had to keep fighting. She had to finish what they had started. The future of Earth, and perhaps the future of her people, depended on her actions in the moments to come. The alien forces, led by General Zorak, were closing in. His soldiers were relentless, their superior weapons overwhelming any defense that Earth's forces had left. Zorak's fleet was still in the sky, sending down blasts that shook the ground beneath them. And on the other side, the human military was advancing, missiled by fear and distrust of the princess, ready to strike down anyone they saw as a threat. The princess knew that peace would not come easily. She had hoped for a peaceful resolution. But now, as the chaos of war raged around her, she understood that the only way to save Earth, and perhaps both their worlds, was through the strength of her resolve. Her eyes scanned the horizon. She could see Zorak's forces advancing, but there was something else. A small group of human soldiers making their way toward the front lines. They weren't here to fight her. They were here to stop the war. There was a glimmer of hope, a spark that told her that not all humans were blinded by fear. Some were willing to stand with her, just as Daniel had. But time was running out. Zorak's forces were nearly upon them, and the princess had to act quickly. She signaled to the human soldiers to follow her lead, her voice clear and commanding as she called out to them. "Move quickly. We have to hold them off long enough for the others to get into position." With no time to waste, she charged toward the front lines, her weapon raised. The human soldiers, their faces determined, followed her, ready to fight alongside the princess against the alien forces. It was a strange and unlikely alliance, but in the heat of battle, their unity was stronger than their differences. The first wave of Zorak's soldiers met them in the open field. The air was thick with smoke as explosions rang out, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The princess fought fiercely, her combat training as sharp as ever. She moved with precision, taking down enemies with swift, decisive strikes. The human soldiers beside her were just as skilled, working in perfect coordination with her. But as they pushed forward, the battle became more intense. Zorak's forces were relentless, and the human soldiers were stretched thin. The princess knew they couldn't hold the line forever. She needed to reach Zorak, to confront him and end this conflict once and for all. But getting to him would be no easy task. As she fought, the princess's mind raced. She had never been afraid of battle, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. For her people, for the humans, and for the future they both shared. She had seen the strength of humanity's will. And now, she would show them that her people were not so different. In the distance, she could see Zorak, his massive frame towering above his soldiers. He was determined to end her, to bring this war to its bloody conclusion. But the princess knew she had to face him. This was her final chance to end the bloodshed. With a deep breath, the princess turned toward the battlefield's heart. There was no turning back now. As the fighting raged around her, she moved forward, her heart pounding with the weight of everything she had learned and everything she had lost. This was the moment she had been preparing for. It was the moment that would decide the fate of both Earth and her people, and she was ready to face it head-on. The battlefield was a chaos of smoke, fire, and the echoes of gunfire. The princess, her armor now scared and battle-worn, moved forward with determination. Every step she took felt like it carried the weight of the future, of peace, of survival, of the countless lives that depended on her actions. The human soldiers around her fought with fierce courage, their faces grim but resolute. Despite the chaos, they worked together as one, fighting side by side with the princess, each person understanding that this was no longer just a fight for victory. It was a fight for a future they all could share. In the distance, she saw him, General Zorak, his massive frame standing tall above the battlefield, leading his soldiers with cold efficiency. He was surrounded by his elite guard, his eyes locked on the princess. He had been the symbol of everything she had fought against, ruthless, power-hungry, and bent on destroying the humans. He would stop at nothing to see the princess fall, to see her dreams of peace crushed under his boot. The princess's heart raced as she focused on him. This was it. If she was going to end this war, she had to confront Zorak and stop him before he could destroy any more lives. There was no turning back now. "Stay close," she whispered to the human soldier beside her, a trusted ally who had fought with her since the beginning. The soldier nodded, determination in his eyes. Together, they charged toward Zorak, the battlefield parting before them as they pushed forward. Zorak saw them coming and raised his weapon, a massive energy cannon that could level entire buildings with a single shot. His cold eyes narrowed in hatred as he fired, the blast narrowly missing the princess. But she didn't flinch. She kept moving, her pace never slowing. With every step, she could feel the weight of everything she had learned. The strength of the human spirit, the courage to fight for a better future, and the power of hope. This wasn't just about defeating Zorak. This was about showing both her people and the humans that there was a different way to fight. Not for power, not for control, but for peace. The princess reached Zorak, her sword raised. The two warriors locked eyes for a moment. Two leaders, two people from different worlds, both shaped by war, both determined to see their vision realized. But in that moment, the princess knew that her vision of peace was stronger than his vision of destruction. "You are weak," Zorak sneered, raising his weapon again. "You have betrayed your people, your mission. This is the end." The princess didn't hesitate. With a swift move, she disarmed him, knocking the weapon from his hands. She stepped forward, her voice steady, but filled with a resolve that shook the air. "No," she said, "the end is not here. The end is the choice you make right now. You can continue to fight for destruction, or you can choose peace." Zorak glared at her, his pride and fury fighting against the truth in her words. For a long moment, the battlefield seemed to fall silent. The princess stood before him, not as an enemy, but as a symbol of what could be. A world where both sides could stand together, where destruction and conquest no longer ruled. And in that silence, something in Zorak shifted. His shoulders slumped, the fire in his eyes dimming as the weight of the princess's words sank in. He looked around, at the battle that raged all around them. And for the first time, he saw what it had cost. The lives lost, the suffering, the destruction. With a heavy sigh, Zorak lowered his weapon. Perhaps you are right." The princess's heart surged with hope. It wasn't over yet, but in that moment, she knew they had reached a turning point. There was a chance for peace. The battle didn't end immediately, but the princess's victory wasn't in the bloodshed or the destruction. It was in the choice she had made. In the moment of confrontation, she had shown that even the fiercest warriors could choose a different path. And so, as the battle quieted and both sides stood uncertain but willing to listen, the princess realized that peace had already begun. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, but it was a beginning. A new beginning for both Earth and her people. And for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, this was a world worth fighting for.